As Eva Brückner already made the whole introduction, I will go on and make a presentation introducing the panel again, in a short way. I welcome Eva Maria Borsi, which is an activist from the Hungarian NGO Miksol, Migrant Solidarity Group Hungary, which helps migrants and refugees in Hungary. And she's also a field worker, means that she helps refugees now in the present situation on the borders of Hungary and in Hungary. Good evening. I welcome, on the side of Eva Maria Borsi, Katalin Erdődy, which is an independent curator and cultural worker in Vienna and in Budapest. She recently helped refugees at the Hungarian-Serbian border at Röszke. And she's always also a member of a group called Precarity Office, which is a self-organized group of people working in precarious conditions. Then I welcome Shams Asadi, which first studied city planning, then worked as a city planner for the city of Vienna, then became representative for equal treatment in the city council, and now is the human rights commissioner in the city of Vienna since June 2015. Hello. And I welcome Alexander Polak, linguist, journalist, and spokesperson from the Austrian NGO SOS Mitmensch, which works against racism, unequal treatment, and for the rights of asylum seekers. Hello. Well, I think that we will tonight start discussing the situation in Hungary, as we have the chance that we have two representatives from NGOs who know the reality and the situation concerning human rights in Hungary, and maybe try to compare it with what happens in Austria, and then to compare it with what's happened in the city of Vienna, as the city of Vienna is a human rights city for about, I think, 1.5 years now, and well represented by Mrs. Asadi. So maybe we can have a whole look over different approaches to the topic. And I want to first ask Eva Maria Borsi, maybe you can give us a description from one of the hotspots of this European human rights crisis in Hungary. Well, as Hungary is one of the central transit countries for the refugees on the West Balkan route, but the government, as I see it, and I would judge it, makes all the possible to hinder them. And what does that mean for your work as an NGO, and how do you work under these circumstances?
Mm-hmm. Is it work like that? Yeah. Well, I can say that Budapest is not a human rights capital now, I guess. Sadly, I would like to say some words about this situation, which was started in July, or it was started before, as maybe you know that the government started a xenophobic campaign. So it was much before the refugees or the asylum seekers come to Hungary. They were, I mean, the propaganda started before. So in April we had a national consultation about immigration and terrorism, which the two words were put it together, which was really crazy. And we had after that we had a billboard campaign saying that if you come to Hungary, you must respect our culture and you must respect our rules, which was written in Hungarian, but which really costed a huge amount of money. It was during the summer. And then now we have at the Serbian border the fence, and now we knew that today they will close the Croatian border again with the fence. So it's really sad news, I think. And but I just highlight some points from this summer, which was really changing minds for us in Hungary, yes. So there was, in July, there was started to come many refugees on the Serbian border, and then was a migrant solidarity group who was the first in Szeged to give them humanitarian help. And even, you know, there were people just coming out of the immigration office at Szeged with the paper which was in Hungarian and with a map which is like a blind map, and there was Budapest and Szeged and the refugee camps and nothing else. So they thought in Szeged that they are in Budapest, and they wanted to go by tramway to Budapest. So there was really no information for them, and there were a lot of people coming with families, little kids, pregnant women. So it was really, and nobody tells them nothing in the offices. So then Mixol started to work at Szeged, and after when they came to the capital, there were groups of solidarity groups and humanitarian groups who work at the railway stations. And in August, meanwhile, the government really did nothing about that. They didn't give any help, and also the caritative organizations like churches didn't give anything for them.
But that means that the public opinion in Hungary already was prepared so in a xenophobic way that this all was possible, because Hungary is a country which is member of the European Union, and anyway the officials should follow the rules which exist concerning refugees. So why is it possible that no official reacted and the people were treated like as you describe it? How do you explain that?
I don't know how it is possible. So I was really shocked by that, and we were, as a civil organization, we were always asking, and together with other NGOs like Helsinki Committee, which is more the legal processes who look for it, and also there is Amnesty International, who were also asking the same questions, but really it was no answer for that. How it could be possible that they are treated in a way like that for us. I mean, but it wasn't. The situation changes every day, so it was so we have to be as flexible as we could with the information what we have and we can offer to the asylum seekers.
And what did you do? How did you help the people? What did you organize, and how many people are helping altogether?
Well, it was depending on the time, because there was really such in Szeged, the group was, I mean, in 1 week there were 3,000 people involved in the Facebook group, and they were really organized help. And then in the capital, there were 3 groups on each railway station, and there was so-called transit zones after some time, and there were really organized help, and people were there all the time. I mean, the helpers.
Okay, you told us that there seems to be some confusion about the words that are used. You said there was a conference on migrants, immigrations, and terrorism. And then I have the impression that in Hungary, in the discussion in most media, mainstream media, there's a mixing up between migrants and refugees. Yeah. Do you think that the people of Hungary are aware of what human rights mean in the senses of these different notions? Yeah, what does this? What are to what does it lead that it's like this? That
Well, I think yes, they are always, and in the media, they are always, and they are not without purpose, always mixed like migrants, and they don't say asylum seekers in the media. They say migrants, or they say illegal border crossers, or they really push the public opinion towards being afraid of these people. And yes, migrants is like migrant solidarity group is I mean it's a common word for that, and also I think refugees could be used, but in Mixol we don't really like refugees because we think they are people as we are, so it's people who are looking for asylum, but not refugees.
But your NGO is an NGO who cares. So it's the name of it is for migrants.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, but maybe we have to change a little bit the name. I don't know, but because it changes, the situation is changed.
But it's the same in Austria. I mean, those who don't like the refugees call them migrants, and also in Germany. So this is a common practice.
No, but the difference is that it's the official governmental politics behind that. And what I wanted to ask you too is that Viktor Orban recently had a speech in Romania, and he said that the refugee crisis is a chance to change Europe into a continent based on nationalistic government states again. And in some ways, that he said this is a chance that this might end up the whole EU project, which is a project connected with human rights. Do you think that he may be able to do that? And he really wants to do that?
No. No, what do you think about? I mean, he speaks quite strange. Like he always.
How does he use the human rights? You know, that's what I wanted to ask you. When he says such things, he seems to have a plan. You say, okay, he doesn't have the plan, but how does he use the human rights in his way to make politics?
Oh, I have some cynic sentences about that, but if you have something to say.
Maybe Mrs.
Just to add, because I think what's important in the discussion about Hungary is that the visibility and the invisibility of migration and the situation around refugees, because it's important to note that refugees did not appear in Hungary in this summer, but it's true that the question of migration was not an important part of public discourse in the past years, especially not if you compare it to the public discourse in Austria or in Germany or in other Western European countries. And Viktor Orban is still saying that basically what they are doing is still in line with human rights. Of course, there are many NGOs in Hungary who are argumenting, and based on the 1951 Genf Convention, also appealing to the state of Hungary and to the government that they are not complying with human rights. But basically, I think what has been very significantly questioned in Hungary in the past month is whether the people coming to Hungary or passing through Hungary at the moment are refugees at all. And this was what the media has been also contributing to, is questioning and creating suspicion that these people are not actually refugees, but they are economic migrants. And they are very often appealing also to fear from terrorism in order to create a general climate of anxiety. And then, of course, it's very easy to create a climate of Islamophobia, also based on the history of Hungary, because, I mean, it's over 100 years ago, but there was a Turkish, or there was the occupation by the Ottoman Empire. And I think there are a lot of things in collective memory where you can start pushing buttons and create fear, especially in a climate where it's a majority white society. It's a very, it's a not multicultural society in the sense that it's not what we call in German Migrationsgesellschaft in Hungary. So perhaps just, I think there is this important turn from invisibility to visibility, because Hungary has been on the basis of human rights, has been criticized since the beginning of the 90s, actually, for how they deal with refugees. I mean, there have been several waves of refugees due to the political situations inside Europe as well. So with the Kosovo crisis, I was just rereading articles from the end of the 90s, which sound as if they could have been written today, just you would have to substitute Kosovari people with people arriving from...
Well, I asked that because today's topic is what role do fundamental questions of human rights play in political decisions? And we here have an example of a very negative way looking at the human rights as basis of political decision. That's why I asked these kind of questions. Okay. Well, and the Hungarian people in their majority, how they react. Is there some solidarity with what you are doing, with all the work you are doing? Because I suppose there's a lot of exhausting work you are doing for...
Yes, that was the... I mean, I agree with Katalin that it's really there's buttons which can be pushed, and the fear is coming. But it was really, I mean, a heart-lifting experience this summer. That so huge amount of people came to help. That it was really, for me, it was just shocking. Mm-hmm. And when there was the day, if you remember or know, there was the day when they started to march to Vienna, September the 4th. It was called the March of Hope. And there were, I was in Budapest, and I went on their way together with them, and I think Alexander was there also. Yes, and it was so nice that people, really many people, just came on the highway to put them water and food, and there were even a man who said that if they come to 100 kilometers away, they will make them hot food, and they were really tents and pushes, just coming to this march and to this. I mean, people like feel the. I call it like a peaceful power of these people, because they didn't let them to be provocated, and there was no scandal at the railway stations. Even there were thousands of people. But they said if we can't go, we walk. We can't go by train, we walk. And it was really a day when many people who were passive then came with a car and said, "What can I have?" So there is still really a big movement about refugees or asylum seekers.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But there's now a new law, as far as I remember. I hope I remember correctly, starting from the 1st of September. 15th of September, which sentences illegal migration to Hungary with jail. What are the consequences of this law? Is this really something that already happens? That people are in jail for this? That refugees are in jail for this? Because this is something which is completely against all human rights laws in the European Union.
Yeah, I read about some articles that there were some detentions. They weren't put in jail, but they were sent back to Serbia. But it looks like they say that there's the way to Serbia, and if they go, they go. If they don't go, they don't. So it's not like that. But the situation has really changed. So it's really much more harder than before. But as Katalin said, they are now, after the 15th of September, they are not visible for the people, and before they were visible, and now all the volunteers, or not all, but the volunteers go to the Croatian border to help.
Mm-hmm. 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 And maybe I'll ask questions about how the police reacts, because there are many police reacts, how a police treats refugees. As I spoke with a few who said they never want to go back to Hungary because they were beaten by policemen. Mm-hmm. So is the police in a situation not to respect all the rights of people?
Well, it's I know this. I know controversial things about that, because there are some informations when it was said, and there are in the Amnesty International report, there are really reports about to be beaten and to be really nasty with refugees. But in another point, there is at the border, there were many volunteers who said that the policemen were quite nice. They were helpful, and now at the Croatian border, there are also controversial things about that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Mrs. Erdődy, when we spoke before tonight's discussion, you mentioned that you we want to speak about what all this means for the people working for the NGOs, because I don't think that the Hungarian government really likes this kind of activities. So what is the situation of the NGOs in Hungary as far as you know it?
Maybe it's also important a little bit to look back only in the terms, because my point would be in terms of visibility and invisibility, that there has been a lot happening that public attention has not been aware of until this summer. Also in terms of human rights violations, and most of the police abuse has been happening in refugee camps and in detention centers prior to the larger scale movements in the summer. And the NGOs who started working, I'm not even sure you can call them NGOs because these are voluntary initiatives, so they are not yet so institutionalized or organized. It's really it's a civil movement, let's say, from individuals which are now forming groups. And I think it's important that they responded to the events of the summer. So basically that's when in the different train stations these solidarity groups were established. And what for me was very interesting, that most of the solidarity groups were established around these humanitarian activities, so basically to provide for the basic needs of people at the train stations and passing through the country, but that increasingly, also because of the government policies, these initiatives have been politicized, so they have started organizing demonstrations and protests. But here it's maybe also important to mention, just to have a relatively complex picture of what's happening in Hungary, that actually the Migrant Solidarity Group in Budapest is existing since 2012. So they are doing political work. They actually, in the beginning of the so-called crisis, they explicitly said that they are organizing around political work and not humanitarian activities, as many of the other initiatives. But I think what is equally a question in Hungary and also in Austria is that at the moment humanitarian work is demanding so much energy from the volunteers, and also not only from volunteers but activists who are otherwise politically engaged and would also be doing political work, that there is, I mean, this I would also like to ask from other organizations, that there is very little time left for political mobilizing and political work. And I think this is also one of the reasons that it seems that the pressure is not high enough on either of the countries, because I mean, we will come to the Austrian situation, I don't want to talk about that, but I think that, of course, Hungary is in many terms worse, performing worse, the Hungarian government, but neither of the governments in Europe is actually performing very well.
No, but it's the fact that the volunteers who help the refugees have the same hard jobs in Austria than in Hungary. There is no big difference. So would you say that this kind of work of people from groups, basis groups, yes, does a work what in many ways the government should fulfill? This is human rights works in the field, and people are doing it on a private level. Do you think that this is something that the government should do? Care for the refugees more in a better way, and well...
Yes, of course. I mean, of course, the state, like the governments, should provide in such a situation adequate facilities, adequate conditions. They have the means to do so. It should not necessarily be of course, you can help, they can ask for volunteers, but I'm a bit, also here in Austria, but especially in Hungary, I'm very upheld by the fact that the government is not willing, and most of the NGOs in Hungary started going to the field relatively late. And in Hungary, I mean, we also have to mention that alongside the Hungarian activists, there are activists from all around Europe working at the borders. This is very important and has been a huge support for the Hungarian activists. And I think it's incredibly important that people are getting more and more engaged through these movements, and there is a potential to build a movement, but I think this movement should have political demands, and this is for me still a question, like, can this movement grow and fight also for political demands, as some core activist groups would and are fighting to open borders, etc. But if you ask people in Hungary, for example, if you speak with the volunteers, not everybody would defend the claim for open borders in Europe, because again, public discourse and lack of information is, and anyhow, like, this is a huge discussion within European society, how to proceed. And I mean, maybe just, I'm sorry, just one thing I would like to mention, what happened today, because we're talking about human rights, and 3 things happened today. One is the fact that the Hungarian government announced that it's going to close the borders tonight at midnight, which is, I think...
But what they plan to do? It's the green border.
No, so they built a fence already. There is a fence. It's the same situation as in Serbia. This is one. The other thing, we're talking about human rights. at the Bulgarian-Turkish border, an Afghan man was shot for showing resistance, and the police claims that there was a warning shot fired in the air, which ricocheted, I wonder how, and killed the man. And I mean, and besides that, I'm sorry, I'm going to get a bit emotional, there was an EU summit where Juncker was welcoming the fact that they are going to proceed agreeing with Turkey. And agreeing with Turkey means, and this is again, I just want to come back to human rights and the question of European policies and Hungarian policies. If Turkey is going to be claimed as a safe country, it's the same strategy that Hungary did with Serbia. How relative are our terms in human rights? How flexible are we? Because it seems to me that the EU as well, like Hungary as part of the EU, of course, also becomes incredibly flexible. And this maybe brings me back to your question about Viktor Orban. He's incredibly flexible. Like, he's cynically flexible, but Europe is also growing increasingly flexible in terms of human rights.
Alexander Pollack, would you say that this means that the European governments and the Austrian and Hungarian governments too are not able to do what they should do? Or is it really something like a betrayal of human rights, what happens on this level now?
I mean, I think there's not a common opinion on what they should do. I mean, there's a very wide variety of views on this. I mean, concerning Austria, we had in the past months the refugee issue dominating the political scene. We had what I would call the summer of shame, with a very bad situation for refugees, particularly in Treskirchen, but also in other places. We had then what I would call the weeks of hope, where many refugees were let in, where the trains were going to Austria and from Austria to Germany, where people were actually committing crimes by taking refugees with their cars from Hungary to Austria. So this was a very new situation, I would say. And now we have again a time which is highly insecure, where there is the governments try to close down borders again. I mean, you mentioned already the negotiation with Turkey. Yeah, so it's a situation where, I mean, I wrote down in preparation for this discussion 15 reasons why human rights issues are very difficult to be progressed in Austria, but also in other countries in Europe. I mean, there are reasons starting from that many people see them as minority issues. So what do I care about refugees? I care about my situation. Then the question of how much does it cost? The question of fear. I mean, what will happen? Will we lose something? Will foreigners come who want to impose their life on us? And there's also, in this context, where the wording is very important, if you see them as some FPÖ people called the refugees invaders to Austria, or even occupants, or if you call them refugees or people in a difficult situation. Then in Austria, of course, we have not a right-wing populist party like in Hungary in power, but in a very strong position, the FPÖ. We have a very strong yellow press who enforce a negative discourse on migration and on refugees in particular. So there are many reasons why it's quite difficult to find a real stable, positive position on human rights at this moment. I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yes, you answered in a very extensive way, but this is a good point to ask Shams Asadi. as the mayor of Vienna now, before the election, had another, let's say, perspective on the politics than many politicians, mainstream politicians before him. He said, we will not let the FPÖ get in power. Yeah? And do you think that this is something that might help against what Alexander Pollack says, or the rising of the right-wing populism and all the fears that the population have? Do you think that this is something which works in the direction that Vienna is a city of human rights?
I mean, just Vienna is a human rights city, and just as we declared the city as a human rights city, it was no signs of refugees that they are coming to Vienna. So it was really just goodwill of the city, and it was the awareness of the city that we wanted to be a human rights city. And the issue of refugee for the timing or in summertime, it wasn't something that just for the city, really city, not because of the elections, but it was, still it is, a very important issue, and it's a humanitarian issue. And then our mayor, just from the first second as he heard that even last year, we had a lot of unaccompanied, just young refugees, and city of Vienna just picked them up from Traiskirchen, just at the beginning the girls, and afterwards the young men, and then just there was no really sign that we are going to have many refugees in Vienna. So it was the position of Traiskirchen. It's a shame that people in heart of Europe, they just live in such conditions. And the city of Vienna has tried at least to get the young people and just save them and bring them to the city. But the atmosphere of city, because of the elections, it's very polarized. From one side, the right-wing party, they just focused on refugee subjects. From the other side, it was the just movement of the basis of the society, and they wanted to keep the people, they want to just help. And the political parties, red and green, they really just, as far as I really noticed in the city, very seriously, we try to get this subject in many ways good managed. In July, because of just even before of the movement of refugees, the city of Vienna appointed a coordinator for refugees. And this person is a person that he is in social affairs, and just it was clear that we have to take this subject very serious. And from the beginning, it was a coordination, housing, and everything. And then I guess we are in the right way. And I'm sure that we are going to manage in our schools, in our health system, and our housing. If we are not able to manage all these areas, so we are going to have some human rights violation in Vienna too. But I'm sure that the city of Vienna, we will manage it.
No, but there was one thing that I noticed as a journalist for a few years, that Vienna in many ways makes good refugee and migrant politics, but they didn't speak about it. They made it in some ways in a secret way. And I always ask myself, why is it so? For example, there's this course where migrant women can learn German, Mama lernt Deutsch. Mama learns German. This was something very good, a very good initiative, and it was not really made a big propaganda about it. Why is it so? Is the city of Vienna, are the politicians afraid of the consequences if they speak out loudly that we stand for human rights, and this is something, an instrument that we see as a positive instrument in politics?
No, if even it was just in migration issues, I would say maybe you are right. But I worked for many, many years in urban planning. We had a lot of good measures, and nobody just cared about the public relation of the city. Or just we are, maybe somehow we are a modest city, and we don't sell ourselves very good outside. It is an issue that for me, it's a just question, but I have not found the answer still. We have a lot of good projects. We have in many, many fields, but I don't know why. Maybe really it has to be our goal to speak about that, to communicate that. And of course, if you just look at the European journal about the cities, they write about their measures in a way that you think it's a huge project, it's a huge funding project, but afterwards, if you are there, you see that there is only one house or just one building is renovated, and just there is one flat for social housing. In Vienna, there is 222,000 social flats, but nobody speaks about that because it's a reality, and it's somehow it has to be like that, maybe.
No, but it means that the negative messages then come over the media and get into the public, and not the positive measures get into the public. How do you see that, Alexander Pollack? Is this something which is typical for, let's say, better Austrian politics? Because today we heard that the city of Wels, where they have a mayor from the FPÖ, now he started to cut all social welfare from the city for non-EU residents. This is something that the Standard will write tomorrow. So this is something which has a big publicity, a message like this. And on the other hand, we hear that there are good measures made in Vienna, and there's not so much publicity about it. It is a central problem of human rights politics in Austria.
I mean, there is one politician in Austria who does not too much, but who communicates it quite extensively, Mr. Kurz, the Integrationsminister. So maybe the city of Vienna can learn from Mr. Kurz. Yes. Yeah, really. I mean, he does only really a few projects, but he communicates them as if he would do a lot. But of course, I mean, these projects are also under attack by the FPÖ. Also, Mama lernt Deutsch was, I mean, if you look at the press releases of the FPÖ, they attack these kinds of courses, this kind of money spending, but this shouldn't, this shouldn't lead to hiding this kind of project. So I think I'm absolutely on your side that it's important to communicate proactively what the city, what other cities, what politics is doing positively, because otherwise there are completely wrong views. We did last year research on schools in Vienna because some politicians said their school classes in Vienna where not one children speaks German. And we thought, no, this can't be true. And we asked, first of all, the Vienna City Council to give us information. They were not willing to give us information on this, so we did our own research and contacted schools. And we contacted particularly schools in districts with a high percentage of migrants and so on and so forth, but we couldn't find one school where no children speaks German. So I thought this was a case where really the city and the Stadtschulrat could proactively communicate against these legends, these negative myths that are spread, and it's quite a pity that this is not being done.
We heard a few things about the way that the Hungarian government deals with human rights and how they are treated. You gave us some points why people are afraid or don't want human rights to be spread, but how would you characterize the way that the Austrian government is working on human rights affairs? Where do you see the concrete difference between what happens, for example, in Hungary and what happens, for example, in Austria or in Germany? Because I think these two countries maybe a little bit comparable?
I mean, Austria has a bit of a longer history of democracy now. It has also a longer history of being part of the EU. It has parties in the government that I would call, at least to a large extent, pro-EU. So this makes one big difference to the current Hungarian government who want to renationalize Europe, whatever this means. Also, I think it's not as easy for the present Austrian government to openly make racist statements like we only want Christians in our country and no Muslims. So in a hidden way, this also happens or happened in Austria when there were these refugee programs where 1,500 refugees from Syria were taken into Austria, and it was said primarily women, children, and Christians. Yeah, so I mean there is a gradual difference, but also there are many commonalities. So I mean, also in Austria, it's politicians talk about so-called pull effects, where they are very much afraid if they treat refugees too well, and if they're too friendly, then more will come. And yeah, so the position of the Austrian government is ambivalent, I would say.
It was the same for us. I mean, just on a simple level, that many people say that if we give hot food on the railway stations, then they will want to stay here, or they come here to Hungary for hot food, and it was so absurd that really from Afghanistan I wouldn't go away to have some nice soup in Budapest. So it was really. But people really think about that way sometimes.
Well, how is the city of Vienna dealing with the pull effect? Is this something which is spoken about in the representatives, the political representatives?
No, just the most important point is just looking at the people, that they are in safe and they are in a warm place, and just they have a shelter and the children, because it was one of my most worries, and I was just in Stadtschulrat in September because of the number of the children, and I thought they are unprepared. And right to the education, it's the human rights, and they told me we are very well prepared, and we have the children in schools, and it's good that they deal with this subject, but really I don't know. For the time being, we are in a good position, and I guess with the help of the civil society, it's also it's a help that we cannot just ignore it, and without helping of civil society, the city of Vienna it's impossible to be able to just support the whole of the refugees. And it was a really good cooperation between the NGOs, between the civil society and city of Vienna, and it was a really it's a masterpiece of cooperation and coordination that we saw. And I guess if the city of Vienna was left alone, we couldn't be such successful. And city of Vienna knows about that and very appreciates this. Just really, we have such a active civil society in this city.
Mm-hmm. You wanted to say something about that?
I actually have a question, because it's an experience that we encountered with a friend of mine who arrived from Syria to Vienna 4 weeks ago, and our information was, for example, that at the moment the organizations in the city dealing with the arrival of refugees cannot provide accommodation. Many people were sent away, that there is not enough accommodation. This friend, he is now staying with a friend from my circle of friends, but on the level of what we encountered from the authorities of the city, there was no possibility to propose a solution for him. And as far as I heard, and this is maybe, I don't know, you have more information about this probably, that there are quite a lot of people who are in danger of becoming homeless upon arrival to Vienna at the moment. And also recent information from a friend who is working with underage migrants was that unfortunately there is still quite a large number of underage migrants in Traiskirchen who are still, despite the cold weather, sleeping in tents and dealing with very difficult conditions in terms of health and provisions. So I'm just wondering, because now what you said painted a much more positive picture than what I experienced on a ground level, and I'm just wondering also if there is information about this in terms of numbers, perhaps, of how many people could be received by the city of Vienna and how many people are.
There is no statistic, and it cannot be very just clear statistic, because every day it changes, and even we don't know how much place we will need, shelter we will need, and we will have, because it's such an emergency position that even the city of Vienna looks at the hospitals that they are not used for some many months or years. They try to just adapt it. Even the huge halls on just malls, and just really there's a coordination, and they look at, they try to find out which place still is free, and then they adapt it, because you cannot send them like Traiskirchen. Sometimes there is a small construction that they do for showers and everything, but it's very rapid, and they come, they go, and it's a huge movement, and a city can do a lot, but still our even resources, they are more or less limited.
No, but I can tell you, contribute is that today there was a colleague of mine into Traiskirchen, because there were again journalists let into Traiskirchen, and the situation is that there are no people in the tents anymore, and all of them have a bed now, but there are still 1,300 minors living there. So there's the new organizer Kilian Kleinschmidt, who tries to make it a little better, and he was able to get to this situation that there are no people anymore outside, but there still are so many minors which have no other place to go. Okay.
May I add just one sentence? Because today I had a meeting, and I know that still we have problems with just unaccompanied minors, that they come to Vienna because they are registered in Traiskirchen. And what happens, the children or the young people, the youngsters, they receive a ticket and they come to Vienna, and they don't know the language, they have nothing to drinking, just nothing to eat, and there is somehow in the city, and it's a huge issue for the youth welfare and youth department, just try to find them and the street workers, and just try to bring them to an organization, because they are very afraid of to be in prison or something, and it's very difficult to take somehow just their trust, or just it's quite difficult to get to them, and they prefer to sleep at the street, but not coming with the street workers, because they are very afraid, and it's a huge challenge for the city for the time being.
But altogether, what you describe is that in the whole Austrian country, in Austria, the human rights of these young refugees are not really taken serious in many ways, because otherwise it would not be possible that people are treated like this. So, I wanted to ask you, coming back to our topic of today, the betrayal of human rights. Well, I have the general impression for years now that politicians often see human rights not really as their vital duties, but as declarations of intent in some ways. And that human rights things are minimized in the political practice. For example, Austria said he would spend quite, I think, 650,000 euros for the World Food Programme this year, And 3 weeks ago, we at Standard noticed that he had not even spent this little amount of money. So why is it so? The only politician here on the podium is you.
Poor. I mean, it's not a really subject, because Alexander told human rights, it's really related to minorities in the way of that we think. Because last year it was a quite good experience for me as we started just 2 years ago with the process of human rights, and then they asked me, are you now the appointee for migration or refugees? I told no, for human rights. And they told, human rights? Why we have to have human rights in our city? And then afterwards I asked them, is it possible to send me some examples of your projects for the whole city? Because I wanted to prepare the report that we gave to the city council. And it was for me quite surprising. The whole city administration, they work on human rights cities and just the human rights issues, and they send me, we don't have any project on human rights. Afterwards, I just called each department and asked them, your project in this field, it's very human rights compliant. And then it was interesting, and I wrote the report with my colleague Karin Köring, and it was, for most of the city, it was very interesting to just to be aware that they do something that is related to human rights. And I guess the awareness about human rights is not clear. And just to be maybe just from Vienna, was born here, to have all education or something, they don't need human rights, because they thought, okay, we have everything here, we don't need human rights. Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting, because human rights, maybe it has to be interpreted, or just to really bring it to the point that for everybody it's something that everybody's right. And I guess consciousness is quite, the lack of the consciousness is very clear in the society.
Maybe it's a problem because people don't think about that human rights are something connected to social things too, that there are social human rights. And Mrs. Erdődy, we spoke before the discussion about this matter, how the lack of awareness of social human rights and how the lack of implementation of the social human rights may influence the way that the political human rights and the rights of asylum seekers are treated. Do you see that too?
Well, first of all, maybe just to respond, like human rights, I don't think we can consider human rights as minority rights, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, according to a Polish social scientist, has been recently, like, it's the most performed text, in the sense that it's the most often, it's a document that we constantly refer to, probably for the reason because these rights are not being observed. And what we were talking about before the discussion was, of course, also observing human rights in the long term. And I mean, there, as Smith mentioned, a very important campaign last year about the right to work, for example, and the right to getting equal wage for your work. I mean, if you read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I read it before the discussion, it's incredible, because then it becomes so clear that most of these points are not being observed, neither in Austria, neither in other societies, and they concern all of us, I would say. And maybe, if you allow me, I wanted to take a quote from regarding human rights from the Helsinki Committee, which is an NGO working on human rights in Hungary. And they were saying, this was some time ago, when they said that 30 years ago the practice of human rights was the only way in Hungary to practice politics autonomously. I think this is a very important statement. So, what human rights can mean for a society. And I mean, they say, concerning the contemporary situation, I don't think it was written now, but some years ago, that raising our voice for human rights is also today politics. And of course, the human rights activists have the luxury of not hunting for votes, so they have the luxury of raising their voice without being afraid to lose or win votes. And then they refer to Thomas Jefferson. I will quote this, maybe not all of us like Thomas Jefferson, but he said that one of the only things that we cannot change is the rights of each and every one of that we are born with and that cannot be alienated. And we're, in this sense, in human rights, there are no majority and minority. That's why it's, for me, it's called human rights, because it's about equal rights for all members of society. Which, I mean, this is my interpretation. I'm not a human rights expert.
In the long run, this is of course true. But I mean, if you take again the issue of letting asylum seekers work, only a few people in Austria feel directly affected by it. Indirectly, many feel a negative effect because they think, okay, unemployment will rise. This is new competition. So, with many particular policy issues of human rights, it's very difficult to win elections, and this is one reason why it's so difficult to really progress on human rights, because most people don't see that in the long run it protects us all, because we can all become a minority, or we can all get into the situation that we have to escape from somewhere. So they don't see this general protection, but they see the individual particular problems. And that makes it very difficult also for us to win campaigns and convince the government to act.
You see it in a different way?
Sorry. No, completely. Just I agree with you. But just it was misunderstanding maybe, because I didn't tell that human rights is a minority right. Human rights just right of all of us. And just for every human being, it's not really, but the people, they regard the human rights as a minority rights. And even as I started to work in this issue, people, they told me just for human rights is for refugees. So there is society is not very conscious, and we have to work in this issue and just sensibilizing and just consciousness raising. It's the most important point in human rights work, and it's most of important just job that I have to, and I have to really just work on this issue, and not even outside of society, but inside our public administration also. So.
Well, I want to ask you now if somebody of the listeners have a question and want to ask someone from here, from the people who discuss.
There is a microphone. If somebody doesn't want to be recorded, please give me a sign. But otherwise, it would be good if you use the microphone for the recording. Wenn Sie eine Frage auch auf Deutsch stellen möchten, die Frau Mahert und die Frau Koller würden Sie übersetzen.
I have two questions. First of all, I was quite interested to hear about the sort of historical approach of the Hungarian government. And I was just wondering what you would suggest was the reason for that. Is that sort of an innate racism, or is there something that they actually gained from taking this approach? Is there a practical reason behind it? I think the other question that I'd like to ask as well, which has been touched on a little bit today, but I would like to know what people's opinions are of the decisions to try and cut a deal with Turkey on the migrant issue. My assumption is that it's cowardice, that it's easier to cut a deal with Turkey and to brush it under the carpet and to not have to deal with all the issues within Europe and to not have to make agreements between states in Europe than it is to actually bribe an upcoming despot and to let him deal with the problem instead and turn a blind eye to all of his own actions. And I'd like to know what your perception of that is.
Are there other questions? We can collect them. Okay. Yes.
I have some comments. One of them is the lack of visionary politicians all over Europe. Definitely the situation has overwhelmed Europe. has come, so to speak, overnight, although the UNHCR has been proclaiming and giving data on the number of the refugees who were accumulating in the camps in the Middle East, and it was obvious that people themselves tried to find a solution to what actually the Western deliverers of weapons are doing to those people. It is an amazing process, actually. There are many things to be discussed, but I totally admire the civil initiative of the people in Austria, but here also in Hungary, what they have done. I mean, without asking any questions, without proclaiming any declarations, they just came and helped, and still they are doing it. That was a wonderful cooperation, because politicians need longer, but still we don't see any movement in the solution. The Turkey issue is a very interesting one. Politically, you can look at it as a former speaker, commentator was saying, but it is a solution maybe to the whole thing, because it's not going to end so very quickly. The other thing is what Shams Asadi was mentioning, the action of City of Vienna about the young girls, vulnerable young population. We just took them and brought them to the city. And that's what we need, actually. We have the level of the non-visionary politicians who are used, like in the UN, to talk and come maybe to some resolutions. We have the civil society, the human heart, who runs into the field and just brings food, soup, anything, medication, doctor's help, everybody, food, clothes, everything. It's amazing what we see around in the Bahnhof and actually also in Traiskirchen. And here I would like to say in the brackets, after the intervention and insistence for the first time in the history of Amnesty International to go in and give a report, the whole picture changed. Now, my conclusion is, particularly for the children, let us address the UN Gremia who are there to do things like that. Where is UNICEF for the young children? Do they have any acute and urgent projects to help these people? Because for politics, we know it takes them long, they talk, and for other reasons they cannot come to really fundamental solutions. Until they come to one, situation has changed. People have changed the situation. Refugees have changed the situation. So, what is between the layer of the society, the individuals who help, the very slow-acting dinosaurs of the politics, this in-between, like what City of Vienna did, Sonia Vesely and her group, they just took the people and brought them, and they have the authority, they have the money, they have the power to do that. So, my suggestion, again, going back to Amnesty, is to find this layer of NGOs, UN-related fora, who are also partly, as you were mentioning, by cutting the budget of the refugee feeding, actually they bear a responsibility in why it was not all Mrs. Merkel, it was also that they didn't have really any food. So, I don't know, I'm asking you, all of you, who are those instances whom we could address and ask for help in this middle layer until the big political situation has been found? Thank you. And thank you very much for the very interesting.
Okay, well, who wants to reply to these last questions? Who might be the instances between the politicians who do not really react and the civil society? Is there someone?
Maybe I can answer this question. I guess we cannot tell just very specific player has to solve the problem. There has to be a cooperation and coordination of all of the players. And it's very important, even at European level, for the time being, there is something, but it's happening something. 2 weeks ago, I was in Brussels. For the first time, they didn't refer just a little bit of refugees, but it was the hate crime, for example, and it was the collegium of DG Justice and the first vice president of the EU. For the first time, the Muslims and the Jews, they came together from all over Europe, even from Budapest, and it was just discussed together for the first time in the history of Europe. I couldn't believe that, because all of them, they told, till now, just they spoke without us. For the first time, we sit, all of us here, and just speak together. And there was politicians, there were NGOs, there were communities, and from different parts of the Europe. And I guess maybe we have started a little bit, but refugee, or just, I know that, for example, there is a fund just very newly from European Union. There is an emergency fund for the city, for the states, NGOs and international organizations, but not for the cities, because cities, they are the places that just, they would need that desperately. But there is no money for the cities, and it goes to the state, and the state can just appoint this money or allocate this money wherever that they want. So it's the lack of the just coordination within the Europe. Just look at the Council of Europe. We have the Court for Human Rights. We have the Commissioner for Human Rights. They don't cooperate with just each other. And I guess it's most problem of European Union. And if, for example, we don't have any sanction, we don't have any cooperation, it happens in member states like in Hungary last years, and it happens just in Germany, Austria, or Denmark, that there is a goodwill. But how long, we don't know it. Maybe it's going to really just last until this end of the year, and because of the lack of the money, they will stop it.
But isn't that the question, how the civil society, who helps at the basis in the fields, can manage to influence politics? So, Alexander Pollack, how do you think this might be possible? Is it should there be a new political party founded, or what has to be done to get more influence?
We have now a mediating instance, Mr. Christian Konrad. No, but seriously, I mean, in Austria you have, at least between grassroots people and politics, you have many NGOs, and some are closer to politics, others are closer to the grassroots movements. And what the Austrian government has done, which is a positive step, I don't think maybe you can tell if in Hungary this also takes place. The Austrian government now started roundtables with Austrian NGOs to talk about the situation. They now also let at least the Caritas into Treskirchen, so they started to open up a little bit because they saw that they cannot manage the issue by themselves, and that the situation gets worse if they block out the NGOs than if they take them in. I mean, an NGO like SS Mitmensch is not part of the roundtables, which is okay for us. But other big NGOs like Caritas, like Diakonie, like Volkshilfe, like Samariterbund, like the Red Cross, they have a kind of a mediating function between politics. Yeah.
You wanted to say something about that? How the situation is in Hungary? Because Alexander.
Yes, I'm really jealous because this roundtable doesn't work in our country. So we even didn't get a thank you after these 2 months. They didn't mention the volunteers' work. I mean, in political level, and I worked so much years in the ministry and institutes which were governmental, and I'm so cynical about these roundtables because they are always, just speaking and just put a point at the end, and it doesn't work. But I really believe in this civil power in Hungary somehow, because it really, yes, we don't know how much it lasts. Maybe for 1 year, I don't know. But I feel now so much power in it, and I think it will take us on a higher level, maybe. And yes, but you say your comment was that in Hungary it's more historical or practical.
Yes, that was another question. Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Sorry, and I would say that rather now it's now for me or for us it's more political. So it's always changed. What is the purpose with that? So it's it could be also historical, but for me it seems like it's more politics now. Yeah.
Maybe also regarding Turkey, I mean the real first important step, in my view, should be to open legal ways for refugees to enter Europe. I mean, it's of course important to have talks with Turkey, where more than 2 million refugees are at the moment. It's important also to talk about the food programs of the UN, which are underfunded, so where people in Jordania, Lebanon and so on don't receive enough food by these programs anymore. So it's very important to have these talks and to look at the situation in the Middle East and in Turkey. But for me, the logic and important first step would be to start bringing people into Europe in a coordinated legal way.
Mrs. Asadi, you wanted to say something?
Just about Turkey, yes, you're right, and I'm very I don't know, worried about this action of Europe about Turkey, because it doesn't sound very well, and it was a really good negotiation with Turkey, because Turkey wanted to have something and just to without visa send the Turkish national civil society or just to Europe, and it was really, I'm a little bit worried. It's not a really way that we just accept it and tell that it's the best way. And I guess we have to solve this problem if we take these people legally to Europe, because they will find their way if Europe has started to just have walls and fences and more, and just open the border, and I'm sure that this just storm of people, it's not going to help for a long time. I have just one more point that it was asked about the NGOs and the just basis or civil societies actions and activities. The Austrian government, or actually the Volksanwaltschaft or the ombudsman, ombudsperson, or because I'm not going to tell ombudsperson of the Austria, they declared themselves since 2012 as the House of the Human Rights. And with their commissions, they work with NGOs, and I'm in the advisory board too, and there are 16 NGOs in the advisory board. So it's somehow the human rights work of the national level through the ombudspersons. It's somehow in cooperation with NGOs, and of course the commissions. They are very active people, and they just look at the public organizations and the hospitals and youth organizations and everything, and it's good. And in Austria we have a national action plan that it works also. Just its process, or just building process of the national action plan is also with the NGOs. I'm not quite sure that if it's very open discussion, but still there are some meetings with NGOs, and I guess for the beginning it's not that bad that just NGOs and the governmental organizations, they come together and speak about human rights.
This surely is a good thing, but the point is that, of course, in Austria you could have the impression that human rights are well treated, and there are the Volksanwaltschaft, and there is the city of Vienna, who gets a human rights city, and then come thousands of refugees, and there's a huge problem, because I suppose this means that one central point was never discussed. So is this the problem we are facing, that we spoke a lot about a lot of human rights and we made good things, and there were NGOs talking to politicians, but we didn't think on one main thing? Okay.
I mean, we act.
Yeah.
Maybe we don't speak about it, but there's
maybe
actions.
someone in the public wants to ask a question or say something about that before we finish the discussion.
I will have later a question to Hungary.
Okay, so go on.
But it's probably a vague question. Do you think that the present situation, be it political or historical, we know of course that Roma had a very difficult position in the Hungarian society. It's really, there is this dimension of history. But do you think that this overwhelming charge of refugees will eventually have an impact on the political level in Hungary, so Mr. Orban has less chances to be re-elected? You don't need to answer that if you wish. I will be happy to hear your views.
This fits very well to the question I prepared for the last round of sentences. Well, I wanted to ask you, how do you think the situation will go on? The situation concerning the refugees. How do you think we will be in 1 year after this? When you have another question, maybe you ask it now then.
No, it's just that something that you said, that something that is not discussed, and I think it's this lack of vision. And for me, the lack of vision is especially connected with the left party. But this opens a bigger discussion. I think that there is a crisis, identity crisis for the left party. And I was wondering how Zabi could say, because my impression is that the right country has a clear vision about the whole situation and how to proceed. But the left party, and I'm not talking about Vienna or Austria, but more in Europe, has a problem to find his way again in some way, because he has fear to lose votes, and he's not effective, and it's ineffective, in some way anymore. And it gives the power of discussion on all this topic, like human rights, only to rights party, or let's say more xenophobic position, because it's not talking what you said about the city of Vienna is bad PR in some way. It's really dangerous, because we are not talking about things that until 20 years ago, before the Berlin Wall maybe, they were central on the left parties.
Okay, but maybe I can ask you now, finally, really, where do you think this situation will go to? Where will we stand in 1 year? In Hungary, for example, connected with the question if this will have an influence on the government of Viktor Orban. Where do you think we will stand?
Well, now I would come back maybe to the question of the historical aspects of asylum policy in Hungary. Hungary, in general, in contrary to the other European countries, only accepts 9% of the asylum applications, whereas in most of the EU, it's around 45% asylum applications that are accepted. I just mentioned this number because there are not so many applications, but still most of them are rejected. And so Hungary is, I'm wondering if within 1 year, like most of the people now, they pass through Hungary, so there are very few people applying for asylum for Hungary, except the people who were accused of illegal border crossing, but they are immediately referred back to Serbia, so basically they are not able to apply in Hungary. So I'm very curious what the statistics will look like for this year. This we don't know yet, but I'm supposing that the number of applications will not rise. And to come back to your question about Viktor Orban, it's I mean, the government has been re-elected just like a little bit more than 1 year ago, which of course says a lot about what the perspectives are, let's say. But I think there is one thing I would like to mention, because I found it very important. There was a student movement in end of 2012, And actually, for example, Migrant Solidarity Group grew out of this student movement. And I think there is a continuity of oppositional movements which are mostly connected to political debates, like current debates, which are gaining force. And now the big question for most of the initiatives that organized around humanitarian activities or political activities around refugees is how they continue and whether they can form a movement which is sustainable in the Hungarian political situation at the moment. And then, of course, the next question is, specifically for the Hungarian situation, is whether there will be a new party or any kind of political cooperation between opposition parties emerging that can win back the trust of the population, because there is a crisis of trust in these terms in Hungary as well, like not concerning human rights, but concerning political decisions.
Mrs. Borsi, you see it the same way, in a similar way?
Oh, yes. When I came to Vienna, I said to myself, it's even if it's how many 300 kilometers away, it's a more colored city. I mean, skin colored. So in Budapest we can see so much different colors still now, and as I say that we won't see anymore if it happens. No, I really. I don't know what will be in 1 year. I hope he will, I don't know, get ill and go to a hospital. Something happen with him. I mean, with his doorbell. But I don't know. They say maybe I live in a bubble, but because there are many friends who say that the more right wing, like you have FPÖ, yes, we will have more votes on this wing, which is for me unbelievable. But many people say that it will go more in a nationalist way. I mean, the country, which could happen, yes. And but I mean, Katalin said that the Big Store was a student-based group, and I feel now that we have so many relations. I mean, in also in Europe and in many NGOs and movements, that we will have more force, maybe more power to act and have a demonstration as 100 people in 100,000 people. Sorry, yes, yes in next year, then Vienna had or something like that.
Mrs. Asadi, how will the situation develop in the next year? It's a big question because nobody really knows, but what do you think will happen?
Okay, I'm not going to speak about Hungary because really I don't know, I have no idea. But I can speak about Vienna. I guess if we are not going to be successful about the integration of the refugees or asylum seekers in Vienna, we are going to have a huge problem with the right-wing party too. We have still, even the elections last week, they showed us that we have this problem. So I guess we have to communicate about our measures. We have to take our human rights really serious and just speak about that, and then we will try to have our cooperations with the civil society and of course with the NGOs, and then we can speak about the human rights city, that they are just human rights measures, they are in the hearts of the people. So, and I guess we are in the good way, and then we have to work on this issue very seriously, but I'm at the beginning of my way, but until now I have got support even with the police. I have some cooperations, they are very cooperative, and it gives me a lot of hope that we will do something. And I guess our politicians or decision makers, they also, I do hope that they just realize that the situation is very serious from last election, And just if we think 1/3 of the population of Vienna, they have elected the right-wing party, we have to take it very serious. So I'm I myself, I work for the city administration, and we have to just wait until the building of the government, city government, and afterwards I can just negotiate with our mayor, with our just politicians. And I guess it will be. Just one question that gentleman asked about the just left parties. To be honest, I don't think that if we have a lot of left parties in Europe even. If you look at the Social Democrats, if you look at the Green parties, at the European level, they are more or less people over 50 and so just not young people. And I guess it's the most problem that we don't have too much young people. They are interested in politics, but now it has changed. Even last week, it was a study from Germany. I was in Berlin, and it was just the first study that they did in youth. And just after 30 years, the young people, they are interested in politics. And just, it gives me hope that we are going to have our, just the new people, new faces in our political landscape.
Okay, same question to Alexander Pollack.
Very difficult question. I think there are different scenarios. I mean, we saw this year a wave of borders opening up, starting from Macedonia, over Serbia, Hungary, Austria, Germany. Then we saw, at least in some parts, again the closing down of borders, the even more closing down than before, building fences. It's very difficult to say. I mean, my hope is that in 1 year we'll have a situation where refugees can come in a non-chaotic way, in a non-risky way, where they don't have to risk their lives, where they're not illegalized, where at least a big proportion of them can come into Europe legally and also finds a chance to build a new life here. I also hope that there will be some kind of solution for Syria, a peace solution, but I don't know how. I'm not a foreign policy expert. Same for Iraq, but this is a long-term thing. But I think refugees will continue to come, and the big question is, how will this be managed?
Yes. Thank you. This is a good last word. Thank you very much all together for this very interesting discussion. And well, we can go on discussing because outside in the coffee house there's wine and bread prepared, and we can share some conversation still. Okay. Thank you.